Ridgeway Hill had always been the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved at neighbors they had known since childhood. It sat quietly between rolling fields and a dense forest that locals often joked was older than the town itself. Life here moved slowly. Children rode bikes across cracked sidewalks, dogs barked lazily at passing cars, and the most exciting event of the year was the annual Harvest Fair. That's why when tragedy struck, the shock was so deep it felt like the entire town had been pushed into a nightmare it wasn't prepared to face. The first blow came when Emily Carter, a 28-year-old schoolteacher known for her kindness and bright smile, was found dead inside her home. Emily had never been involved in anything dramatic. She worked with children, volunteered at the library, and lived a life so ordinary that the idea of her being harmed felt impossible. But impossibility meant nothing that cold morning when a neighbor called the police after noticing Emily's front door was slightly open and her car still in the driveway despite her usual habit of leaving early for school. Detective Marcus Hale arrived just after sunrise. He had spent 12 years in law enforcement and believed he had seen enough strange cases to avoid being surprised easily. But stepping into Emily Carter's small, tidy living room made something tighten in his chest. There were no signs of a fight. Everything was perfectly in place. The cushions on the couch were straight. The books were aligned on the shelves. A cup of tea sat on the table, still warm, as if Emily had stepped away only minutes earlier. Yet her lifeless body was upstairs in her bedroom, lying peacefully on the floor, as though she had fallen asleep and simply never woken up. The medical examiner quickly confirmed there were no external injuries. No bruises. No cuts. No clear cause of death. That alone was strange enough, but what concerned Marcus more was the absence of evidence. No fingerprints other than Emily's. No footprints. No smudges on doorknobs. Nothing indicating someone else had been there. It was as if the house itself was holding on to a secret it refused to share. Downstairs, Marcus stood in front of Emily's laptop. The screen was still glowing faintly, showing an open video call window. Emily's face stared back at him, only it wasn't a still picture. It had been a live call. The timestamp showed the call took place 1 hour after Emily was estimated to have died. Someone had used her computer. Someone had pretended to be her. Marcus leaned closer, replaying what remained of the call. The footage was grainy, and the lighting was poor, but the shape of the figure on the screen was unmistakable. Emily's hair, Emily's face, Emily's posture. But the eyes, even in the fuzzy video, looked flat and unfocused, as if whoever sat in the chair was wearing a mask of her face rather than truly being her. When Marcus interviewed neighbors, the confusion grew thicker. Mrs. Dean, the elderly woman who lived across the street, insisted she saw Emily return home the evening before around 6. She described Emily carrying grocery bags, fumbling with her keys, and entering her house with her usual bright smile. Another neighbor claimed she saw Emily jogging near the park at 8. A group of teenagers swore Emily had spoken to them at a convenience store just before midnight, asking if they knew whether the store had a new delivery of herbal teas she liked. Marcus listened to every account with growing disbelief. All these sightings took place long after the coroner believed Emily had died, and everyone who saw her insisted the woman they encountered was not just similar to Emily. It was Emily. For a moment, Marcus considered whether the coroner might be wrong, but the medical examiner was confident in the timeline. And even if Emily somehow had been alive longer than they thought, there was still the strange behavior. The Emily people saw seemed distant, quiet, and slightly off. A witness said she walked strangely, like she was mimicking the idea of walking. Another thought her smile looked too stiff, too perfect. And the teenagers insisted her voice sounded lower than usual, as if she had a cold or was forcing her words. Marcus returned to Emily's house to examine it again. Something felt wrong. Like there was still a piece of the puzzle he was missing. He searched through drawers and cabinets and finally, on her laptop, he discovered a hidden folder buried deep inside her documents. The folder was password protected, but Emily had written the password on a sticky note under her keyboard. It was a habit she must have developed long before technology became a risk, and Marcus felt a pang of sadness realizing how trusting she had been. Inside the folder, dozens of emails popped up. They were all from one sender. Someone who used a single name, Reflection. The emails were short and unsettling. Most were only a sentence, or half a sentence. One said, "You look different today." Another read, "Sometimes I wonder what it feels like to be you." The one that bothered Marcus the most simply said, You won't see me coming. Marcus felt a coldness grow in the pit of his stomach. Someone had been stalking Emily, and the way they wrote suggested they didn't just want to watch her. They wanted something more. Something intimate. Something dangerous. He printed the emails and studied them again. The writing carried an eerie sense of detachment, like the sender didn't fully understand emotions, only imitated them. Whoever Reflection was, they seemed obsessed with copying Emily's life, studying her habits, and imagining what it would be like to live as her. Marcus didn't believe in supernatural theories, but the situation felt surreal. Someone had moved through Emily's life, wearing her routine like a costume. Someone had walked into her house, used her computer, and answered video calls pretending to be her. Someone had been seen all over town acting like her. As the sun set behind Ridgeway Hill that evening, Marcus stood outside Emily's house with a growing sense of dread. The leaves rustled softly, and the street was quiet, but the silence felt unnatural, almost staged. Emily's neighbors peeked through windows, frightened and confused, whispering theories Marcus knew would spread wildly by morning. But he had a deeper fear forming inside him, a thought he wasn't ready to share with anyone else. What if Emily wasn't the only one? What if someone capable of copying her so perfectly had been doing this to others? And what if they weren't finished? Marcus didn't know it yet, but Emily Carter's death was only the beginning of a much darker mystery, one that would pull the entire town into terror and place Marcus himself at the center of a nightmare he could never escape. 3 weeks after Emily Carter's death, Ridgeway Hill was still struggling to return to normal. Parents walked their children to school instead of letting them go alone. People double-checked their locks even during daylight hours. Conversations that once centered around work, family, and small-town gossip now circled only one topic: the mysterious figure who walked around town wearing Emily's face. The police had made no public statements except to confirm an ongoing investigation, which only fueled rumors. Some believed it was a stalker. Some whispered about a ghost. Others convinced themselves it was just confusion caused by panic. But Detective Marcus Hale knew none of those explanations fit. Something darker was happening, and it wasn't finished. Marcus had barely begun sorting through the evidence from Emily's case when another call came in. A mechanic named Daniel Brooks had been found dead inside his workshop late at night. Like Emily, Daniel was well-liked, hard-working, and had no known enemies. He spent most of his days repairing old cars and chatting with regular customers who enjoyed his easygoing sense of humor. He lived alone, kept to himself, and had never been involved in anything criminal. His death shocked the town almost as much as Emily's had. Marcus arrived at the workshop and immediately felt a chilling sense of familiarity. The scene was eerily clean. Tools were neatly arranged, the floor spotless except for a few oil stains that had been there for years, and Daniel's body lay next to the lift, positioned almost too naturally, as if someone had gently placed him there. There were no signs of a struggle, no fingerprints except his own, no footprints in the dust. It was as though the killer moved without leaving a trace, like a shadow that knew where not to step. The coroner estimated Daniel's time of death to be around 9 in the evening. But before Marcus could even finish processing that information, reports from witnesses began pouring in. A gas station attendant claimed Daniel had stopped by around 11 to fill his car with fuel. A couple walking their dog insisted they saw him buying snacks at a convenience store later that night. One of Daniel's co-workers swore he saw him leaving the workshop at 10, locking the gate behind him as usual. Every sighting happened after Daniel had already died. Marcus interviewed the gas station attendant first. The clerk described Daniel's face, voice, and clothes with perfect clarity. He even remembered Daniel tapping the counter impatiently the way he always did. Marcus made him watch the station security footage. Daniel appeared on the screen, wearing his signature work jacket, the same messy hairstyle, and the familiar half-smile he gave when he was in a good mood. But something was off. Marcus noticed it immediately. In the video, Daniel had a thin scar near his jawline, a scar Marcus hadn't seen on the real Daniel during the body examination. It was small and almost unnoticeable, but it shouldn't have been there at all. When Marcus asked the clerk if he had noticed anything unusual, the man hesitated before admitting there was something odd about Daniel's movements. He said Daniel seemed stiff, almost robotic, as though he were thinking about each step before taking it. His smile looked forced, like he was copying an expression rather than actually feeling it. And when Daniel spoke, the pitch of his voice sounded slightly lower than usual, though not enough to trigger alarm. Marcus replayed the footage again and again, each time feeling a deeper sense of dread. Someone was copying Daniel just as they copied Emily. Someone had watched him, learned his habits, and walked through the town pretending to be him. The idea alone was terrifying. But the evidence showed something even more disturbing. The impersonation was getting better. Marcus examined Daniel's phone records. A week before his death, Daniel had reported strange activity at his home but never filed an official complaint. He had called the police hotline once, saying someone was entering his backyard late at night and standing by his windows. Daniel described a person wearing a hood, too still to be normal, almost like they were studying him. But when the patrol car arrived, nobody was there. An officer suggested it was probably a prowler or a neighbor's kid, and Daniel agreed to drop it. Now, that decision weighed heavily on Marcus. He began searching deeper into Daniel's life, hoping to uncover a clue Emily's case hadn't revealed. But again, he found nothing unusual. No shady connections. No arguments. No threats. The only link Marcus could find between Emily and Daniel was something so small it almost felt irrelevant. Both lived ordinary lives. Both were seen as kind-hearted people, and both had been seen in town after they had already died. Marcus returned to the police station late that night, unable to shake the feeling that the killer was growing bolder, more confident. He pinned photos of Emily and Daniel onto the investigation board and stared at them side by side. Same pattern. Same eerie impersonation afterward. Same lack of evidence. Someone was watching their victim so closely that they could mimic every detail except the smallest imperfections. He began listing all the strange details witnesses had reported. Emily walking slightly differently. Daniel speaking with a lower voice. Emily smiling stiffly. Daniel moving like a puppet. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. Whoever the killer was, they weren't just imitating appearances, they were attempting to inhabit their victims' identities. To become them. And something about the way they moved suggested they were still learning. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when an elderly woman named Mrs. Klein came forward. She told Marcus she had seen Daniel at the gas station too, but she had stayed quiet until now because she thought her memory was failing. She said Daniel looked like himself, but something was deeply wrong. He didn't recognize her, even though she had known him from childhood. He stared at her with wide, expressionless eyes that made her feel like she was being examined rather than greeted. She whispered to Marcus that the Daniel she saw had no warmth, no personality, no spark. It was like seeing a perfect wax statue that moved and spoke but wasn't alive. Her description made Marcus's skin crawl. It was the same way witnesses described Emily's last sightings. Marcus returned to the evidence board and drew a connection between the two cases. Both victims had reported being watched before they died. Both had stalkers who moved silently, leaving no trace. Both had been replaced, even briefly, by someone pretending to be them. And both had small details that the impersonator got wrong. The media eventually caught wind of the pattern, and within days, the town was engulfed in fear. Newspapers and online blogs began calling the unknown murderer the Doppelganger Killer, a name that spread quickly. People avoided going outside alone. Some refused to look out their windows at night. Others started covering mirrors in their homes after rumors spread that the killer practiced mimicry by studying reflections. Marcus hated the nickname, but he couldn't deny it fit. Someone was copying people so perfectly that witnesses couldn't tell the difference. Someone was wearing masks made of faces they didn't own. And they were getting better each time. Marcus's instinct screamed that the killer wasn't finished. Emily and Daniel were only the beginning. Someone was out there studying their next face, rehearsing their next identity. And this time, the killer would leave a message so deliberate and chilling that Marcus would understand nothing about these murders was random. The Doppelganger Killer had a plan, and they were only just beginning to reveal it. Detective Marcus Hale had never been a man easily shaken, but by the time the second victim's file closed for the night, he felt something he hadn't felt since his rookie days, real fear. It crept into him slowly, settling beneath his ribs like a cold stone. He couldn't explain it to anyone, not even to himself, but something inside him knew that the Doppelganger Killer wasn't just copying faces. They were evolving, perfecting every imitation, becoming better with each crime. And now, deep down, Marcus sensed that the killer's focus was shifting toward him. But he had no proof, only instincts. And instincts weren't enough to convince a department already stretched thin by panic. It was a rainy night when the next clue arrived, carried not by a witness or patrol officer, but by a trembling teenager who walked into the station clutching a flash drive like it was a live grenade. His clothes were soaked, his eyes wide, and he kept darting glances over his shoulder. Marcus saw him and immediately knew something serious had happened. The boy introduced himself as Kyle Turner. He said he worked part-time evenings at Ridgeway Small Internet Cafe and believed he had stumbled onto something connected to the recent murders. Marcus offered him a seat and told him to start from the beginning. Kyle took a deep breath, gripping the flash drive, his knuckles white. He explained that the cafe had security cameras not just for safety but also to check if anyone tampered with the computer equipment. The previous night, around 2 in the morning, one of the cameras caught a man sitting at a computer long after closing time. The cafe had been locked. All the lights were off. But the man sat there, typing calmly as though he belonged there. Kyle didn't notice the footage until he reviewed the logs the next day. And when he watched it, his stomach twisted in fear. He recognized the man immediately. It was Daniel Brooks. But Daniel had already been dead for 4 days. Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken. He plugged the flash drive into his office computer and opened the video file. At first, the footage showed only the dim glow of computer screens and the quiet stillness of the cafe after hours. Then, from the darkness near the back, a figure slowly stepped into frame. The man walked toward one of the computers and sat down, moving with deliberate precision. Marcus froze. Even through the grainy black and white footage, Daniel Brooks' face was unmistakable. The same jawline, the same hairstyle, the same work jacket he always wore at the shop. But there was something fundamentally wrong about him. The eyes were blank, empty, as if whoever was wearing that face had no idea how to truly use it. He blinked too infrequently. His head turned too slowly. His movements resembled someone replaying actions they had seen before instead of naturally performing them. Then the figure leaned toward the camera. The motion was stiff, jerky, unnatural, like a puppet pulled by strings. When he straightened again, his lips stretched into a smile that didn't look human. It was too wide, too forced, too still. Marcus felt the hairs on his neck rise. The figure began typing. Kyle had also included a second file, a screen recording from the computer Daniel had used. When Marcus opened it, he saw the figure typing an email, not a full message, but a draft. Only 4 words sat in the message box. "I see you, Marcus." Marcus's blood ran cold. Kyle said the man left the cafe minutes later, disappearing before dawn. No alarms had gone off. No doors had been forced open. The man had simply appeared inside the building and vanished hours later. The next morning, reports started pouring into the station. People claimed they had seen Daniel around town, walking down Main Street, staring through windows, standing behind parked cars, watching them. Some sightings described him as completely normal. Others said his movements were jerky, his posture too straight, his blinking too slow. A few people insisted that when they tried calling out to him, he turned his head too far, like his neck didn't know its limit. Marcus began to realize something horrifying. These sightings weren't just about confusion or panic. The killer wasn't simply wearing a disguise. They were adjusting, practicing, refining the stolen face. The killer was learning to be Daniel. As Marcus dug deeper, he uncovered a disturbing pattern. Security footage from the night Daniel was killed showed a faint shape near his workshop, a shadow that didn't match any known employee or passerby. In one frame, the shape looked hunched and strange, like it was trying to copy Daniel's way of walking but hadn't mastered it yet. The next frame showed it standing tall and still, as though resetting itself. The more Marcus replayed the footage, the more the truth took shape. The killer didn't just stalk their victims before killing them. They mimicked them beforehand, studying their posture and habits, testing movements like a performer practicing for a role. They were rehearsing in plain sight. He met with a behavioral analyst who had been following the case quietly. She studied the video of Daniel in the cafe and listened as Marcus explained the witnesses' descriptions. What she said shook him. She told him he wasn't dealing with a typical killer. This wasn't someone who wanted attention or chaos. This was someone who viewed each victim as a role they needed to perfect. Someone who couldn't stand being imperfect. Someone who would keep practicing until the imitation was flawless. And that meant the killer would continue evolving, polishing each stolen identity until it could walk through town unnoticed. Marcus asked her why the killer would target him specifically by leaving the message in the video. She looked at him gravely and said something that echoed through his mind for days. "Because they're studying you now." Those words felt like a trap snapping shut. Marcus began noticing small things that unsettled him. His neighbors claimed they saw him leaving his house late at night, even though he had been asleep. A shopkeeper swore Marcus had come into her store at dawn to buy a bag of chips, eating them slowly in the corner while watching a group of teenagers. Marcus knew he had been at the station all morning. A jogger said she saw him standing near the edge of the forest, staring blankly into the trees, unmoving for several minutes. Marcus had never been there. Every sighting happened at times when Marcus couldn't possibly be in two places at once, which meant only one thing. The killer had started practicing his face. Every night, Marcus lay awake wondering where the killer was now, standing in the shadows, watching him through windows, copying his walk, studying his voice, learning how to move like him. He couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere close, someone was practicing being him, rehearsing his life like it was a script. And Marcus knew that when the killer finally perfected their imitation, the next body to appear in Ridgeway Hill might be his own, unless he caught the Doppelganger Killer first. But time was running out. The killer was getting better, and Marcus could feel them getting closer. Detective Mara Quinn had been in interrogation rooms hundreds of times, but nothing about the man sitting across from her felt ordinary. Adrian Cole held himself with a calmness that didn't belong to someone accused of murder. His hands rested neatly on the metal table, fingers interlocked, as though he had simply stopped by to answer a few polite questions. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't protesting. He wasn't even confused. Instead, he watched Mara with the kind of knowing stare that made his skin tighten, as if he was silently assessing her the same way she was assessing him. Behind the one-way glass, officers whispered about how strange he was, how his stillness seemed rehearsed, almost copied from someone who had studied humans but had never quite understood how to mimic them perfectly. Mara opened the file in front of her and slid a crime scene photograph across the table. The victim, Nathan Hale, lay on the pavement behind his house with a gunshot wound to the chest. Adrian barely glanced at it. He simply nodded, then returned his gaze to her. Mara asked if he recognized the man. Adrian said yes. Nathan had been a co-worker, not a close friend. Someone he talked to occasionally in the break room. She waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. Instead, he folded his arms lightly, as if preserving energy for something more important. She explained the evidence they had collected so far. Witnesses reported seeing a man who looked exactly like Adrian sprinting from the scene. Security footage captured the same figure entering Nathan's neighborhood minutes before the murder. But most damning of all was the fact that the killer had worn Adrian's jacket, the same distinctive gray coat found earlier in his apartment. Adrian's expression didn't change. He didn't deny it. He didn't flinch. He quietly said he understood why the police were suspicious. That was when Mara leaned forward and asked the question that had been bothering her since the beginning. Where was he during the time of the murder? Adrian hesitated for the first time, his eyes drifting upward as though trying to pull the memory from somewhere distant. He said he was home, asleep, alone. No witnesses, no alibi, nothing to confirm his story. The room grew heavier as the silence stretched between them. Mara pressed him, her voice steady but firm. She asked why someone who looked exactly like him had been seen near the crime scene. Adrian inhaled shakily, the only sign of unease he had shown so far. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled at the edges. He told her he had seen the man too. At first, Mara thought she misheard him, but Adrian repeated it. He claimed there was someone out there who looked just like him, someone who wasn't related to him, wasn't connected to him, and didn't share any part of his life. A stranger who could pass as his twin. A perfect copy. Mara leaned back slowly. She had heard strange excuses before, but this one was different. Adrian wasn't frantic or dramatic. He wasn't offering wild explanations out of panic. Instead, he spoke with the defeated calm of someone stating a truth he knew no one would ever believe. Mara asked when he first noticed this supposed double. Adrian said it started 3 months ago. He would spot the man in crowds, only for him to disappear seconds later. Once at a gas station, another time outside his office. The encounters were brief and unsettling. He had tried to approach him once, but the man vanished before he reached him. At first Adrian thought it was stress, or maybe a trick of the mind. But then coworkers began to ask why he had ignored them earlier in the day when he swore he hadn't been at work yet. Neighbors mentioned seeing him leave the house at odd hours when he had been inside the whole time. Small things. unimportant alone, but together they formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. Mara found herself listening more closely than she expected. Something about Adrian's steady tone made his story feel less like an excuse and more like a confession of fear. She asked why he hadn't reported any of this earlier. Adrian gave a hollow smile and gestured at the room. He said no one would have believed him. People don't go to the police claiming they have a double following them around. Not unless they want to be locked away. Mara couldn't argue with that. She tried shifting the conversation back to facts. She asked how this double would have gotten into his apartment to take his jacket. Adrian said he didn't know. He admitted he sometimes woke up to things slightly out of place, but had always convinced himself he was imagining it. Drawers left open. Lights he didn't remember turning on. Shoes moved a few inches. He thought it was stress, or sleepwalking, or overthinking. But now, with everything happening, he wasn't sure anymore. Mara studied his face, searching for signs of deception. She found none. But she also knew sincerity didn't equal innocence. People could seem truthful when they weren't. People could believe lies they told themselves. Still, his story gnawed at her. It reminded her of the woman from Chapter 1, the one who claimed a double had followed her before she disappeared, and the man from Chapter 2 who swore someone had taken his identity. Patterns were emerging, and Mara didn't believe in coincidences. She asked Adrian to describe the double in detail. He replied that the man wasn't just similar to him, he was identical. Every feature, every expression, every mannerism, even the way he walked. Adrian said that seeing him was like looking into a mirror that breathed and moved independently. Mara asked if he thought this double was responsible for the murder. Adrian nodded. He said he didn't know why the man was doing this, why he had chosen him, or what he wanted. But he felt watched, observed, copied, as though someone had been studying him long enough to become him. Mara felt a chill that reached her spine. The room felt colder. She forced herself to remain grounded. She touched her pen to the notepad and asked Adrian if he was willing to take a polygraph test. Adrian said yes. Without hesitation. The polygraph room was small, dimly lit, with wires stretching across the table like veins. Adrian sat still as they strapped the sensors around his arms and chest. His heart rate showed calmness that didn't match the tension of the moment. Mara watched from behind the glass as the questions began. Basic ones first. His name, his address, his occupation. All consistent. His pulse never spiked. Then came the key questions. Did you kill Nathan Hale? Adrian said no. The machine showed no change. Were you at Nathan Hale's house the night he died? Adrian said no. Again, steady. Do you know who killed Nathan Hale? Adrian hesitated before answering, as though searching for the right phrasing. Then he said yes. This time the machine flickered sharply. Mara stiffened. The technician asked him to clarify. Adrian explained that he believed his double had killed Nathan. Another spike. A bigger one. The polygraph interpreted the hesitation, the emotional weight, the uncertainty, as deception. The machine wasn't built to measure supernatural claims or psychological confusion. To the machine, a stressed truth looked exactly like a lie. After the test, Adrian was returned to the interrogation room. He looked exhausted, his earlier calm replaced by something more brittle. Mara entered with the results and placed them on the table. She watched his shoulders fall as he read them. He whispered that he knew this would happen. No one would believe him. They never had. Mara asked him one more time if he had killed Nathan Hale. Adrian looked up, eyes hollow, and said no. Not with defiance. Not with fear. With certainty. The kind that came from a person who had already accepted that the truth didn't matter anymore. Mara stared at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, took the file, and left the room. Because outside the door, another officer was waiting for her. And he had news that changed everything. They had just received footage from a gas station 5 miles from Nathan's house. The timestamp was from the exact time of the murder. And on that footage was a man. A man who looked exactly like Adrian Cole. But Adrian was already in custody during that time. And the man in the footage was smiling directly at the camera. Detective Mara Quinn stared at the grainy gas station footage as if her mind needed extra time to believe what her eyes were seeing. The timestamp left no room for doubt. The man on screen, the one walking casually past pump number 4, his hands tucked into a gray jacket identical to Adrian Cole's, had been recorded at the exact hour Adrian sat locked in an interrogation room downtown. The resemblance was perfect. The posture, the stride, the slight tilt of the head when he looked up at the security camera, and the smile. That same unsettling smile she had seen in the earlier grainy clips connected to the other victims. A smile that felt too deliberate, too controlled, as though the man behind it wasn't expressing joy but demonstrating an imitation of it. Mara's breath felt caught in her chest. She replayed the footage again and again until she finally whispered to the officer beside her, "This isn't possible." The officer shook his head slowly. He agreed. It wasn't possible, but it was real. The evidence didn't care about logic. The truth didn't wait for comfortable explanations. Mara felt a cold certainty creeping up her spine. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to replicate Adrian Cole, either through some unimaginable procedure or something that defied what she had always believed about the world. And if this man had copied Adrian so perfectly that even Adrian himself couldn't tell where he ended and his double began, then the threat was far greater than a single murder investigation. She hurried back to the interrogation room, opened the door, and found Adrian sitting exactly where she left him. His eyes lifted to hers, full of dread rather than hope. He asked softly what had happened. Mara hesitated. She didn't know how to tell him that he wasn't insane, that the impossible had just become possible. So she simply said they needed to move him somewhere safe. Adrian frowned. Safe from what? Mara said she would explain once they got out of the station. She requested 2 officers to escort them to a secure room away from the main hall. She didn't want anyone else near Adrian until she understood what they were dealing with. As they moved him down the hallway, the lights flickered once, then steadied. It could have been nothing. A momentary power shift. But Mara felt her pulse quicken. She had seen enough horror in the past month to know when a coincidence wasn't a coincidence. They reached the secure room, a soundproofed interview chamber used for high-risk witnesses. Mara closed the door behind them, exhaling heavily. Adrian asked what the footage showed. This time she told him everything. His face tightened with fear and a grim kind of relief, as though he had been waiting for someone else to witness what he had been living through. He said the double wasn't just copying him for fun. It was replacing him, bit by bit, crime by crime. And soon, people would start thinking Adrian himself had become dangerous or unstable, that the double was the real version of him, and he was the imposter. Mara asked the question she dreaded. Did Adrian have any idea why the double was targeting him? For the first time since she'd met him, Adrian lost the calm control he clung to. He rubbed his temples, his voice shaking as he admitted he didn't know. But he could feel something. A connection. A pull. Like the double wasn't just watching him but studying him from inside a dark room where Adrian could never see. Mara listened, her chest tightening with every word. She had dealt with murderers and manipulators her entire career. But this felt different. This felt like something slipping out of the cracks of reality. Just as she was about to ask another question, her phone buzzed. It was Officer Ramirez from the front desk. His voice came through in a frantic whisper. Someone was asking for Adrian. A man who looked exactly like him. Mara froze. She asked where he was now. Ramirez said they tried to stop him, but he slipped past security as if he knew the station's layout better than they did. Mara grabbed her gun, motioned for Adrian to stay behind her, and moved toward the door. Before she reached it, there was a faint knock on the other side. Not loud, not hurried. A single, polite tap. Adrian stumbled back, shaking. Mara aimed her gun at the door and told whoever was on the other side to identify themselves. No answer. Only silence. The type of silence that feels intentional, as if someone is holding their breath just inches away. Mara stepped closer, her pulse hammering in her ears. The room felt too tight, the air too thin. She whispered for Adrian to move behind the table, just in case. Then the door handle twitched. Not fully turning. Just enough to show that whoever was out there could enter at any moment. Mara signaled Adrian to stay quiet. She counted her own breaths to keep from firing out of panic. Then suddenly a loud crash echoed from down the hallway. The handle stilled. The presence on the other side seemed to drift away. Mara waited several seconds before opening the door a crack. She peeked into the hallway. It was empty. Too empty. She motioned for Adrian to follow and they moved quickly, heading for the back exit. The station felt wrong now, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mara checked each corner, her steps silent and cautious. Adrian stayed close behind her, shivering with every sound. As they rounded the corner toward the evidence room, Mara saw something that made her freeze mid-step. A figure standing at the far end of the hallway, motionless, facing them. The dim overhead lights flickered, revealing the face. Adrian's face. His perfect mirror. The double tilted its head slowly, almost curiously, like a predator trying to understand its prey. Mara raised her gun, shouting for him to stop. But the double didn't move. It just watched them. Its smile stretched wider than human smiles normally did, an imitation pushed too far. Adrian's knees gave out. Mara grabbed his arm to keep him from falling. The double's eyes shifted, not to Mara, not to the gun, but to Adrian. Like she wasn't even there. Like Adrian was the only real target in the world. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again and the double ran. Not away from them. Toward them. In a blur of motion so fast Mara barely had time to react. She fired. Once. Twice. The bullets tore through the air, but the double darted past, its footfall silent despite the speed. It brushed against her shoulder as it moved, and the cold that radiated from its body felt like ice burning his skin. She spun around, firing again, but it was gone. Vanished down another hallway before she could get a clean shot. Adrian was shaking uncontrollably, whispering that this was exactly what he feared. The double wasn't just copying him. It was hunting him. Mara forced herself to stay calm. She helped Adrian to his feet and moved toward the emergency exit. They had to get out. They had to get somewhere public. Somewhere crowded. Somewhere the double couldn't isolate them. But when they burst through the exit into the parking lot, Mara's heart sank. The lot was empty. The security lights above flickered as though struggling to stay alive. And standing beneath the flickering glow was the double. It stood perfectly still, the cold night wind pushing its hair slightly. Its face reflected no emotion, like a wax version of Adrian brought to life. Mara aimed her gun, but the double didn't flinch. Instead, it raised one hand slowly and pointed directly at Adrian. A gesture of claim. A silent message. Mara pulled the trigger again, but the double moved, slipping backward into the shadows at an impossible speed. One blink and it was gone. Not running. Not hiding. Simply gone. Adrian collapsed to the ground, sobbing. He said he didn't understand why this was happening. Why someone who looked like him was determined to destroy his life. Why it felt like the double wasn't just copying him but replacing him in people's memories, in video footage, in every place he should have been safe. Mara knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to steady him. She told him they would figure it out, but the words tasted hollow. Because deep down, she wasn't sure anymore. As she looked into the darkness, she felt the terrifying realization settle inside her. The double didn't just want to mimic Adrian. It wanted to erase him. And now that it had shown itself openly, nothing would stop it from finishing what it started. And somewhere beyond the reach of the flickering lights, something watched them both. Something with Adrian's face, and a smile that didn't belong to anyone human.